Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the continuing experiment that is the Mercenary Historian channel. I am the aforementioned Mercenary Historian. My name is David. I'll be your host on this continuing exploration of history. Now, we will be continuing our exploration of historical horror in honor of the month of October, but I just wanted to make another announcement. I will be doing a longer video. Hopefully it'll be up by the end of this weekend on a bit of the history of the U.S. Constitution, how it was created, who was present when they were there. So stay tuned and subscribe to the channel if you are interested in that, along with any other topics that will be coming up in the future. Second bit, some of you have had trouble hearing me. I've got a microphone on the way, possibly a new camera even, so we'll talk about that soon too. But since we did vampires last time, I figured that we would follow up with arguably the second most famous Western monster, the werewolf. Now, like the vampire, the werewolf has dominated the imaginations and nightmares of people for centuries. The idea that a person can turn into an animal is all over mythology and legend from almost every culture. You see were sharks off the coast of Africa, the Wendigo in Native American legend. But like last time, we're going to focus on kind of the historical evolution of the werewolf, where it comes from, the references that bring it about, at least in part. So, it's generally agreed the first literary reference to the werewolf is probably found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, possibly the oldest story from the Mesopotamian region. Now, in that story, Gilgamesh, our aforementioned hero, turns down a potential relationship with a sorceress. Why does he? Because she had turned her ex into a wolf after the end of her previous relationship. That does seem like a fair warning sign to stay out of a relationship like that, but it is one of the first references that specifically mentions shifting into the form of a wolf. You also see it in Greek mythology. Now, Greek mythology is rife with people, and gods especially, turning into all sorts of animals, but wolves seem to hold a special place, particularly for a man in the legend named Lycon and his two sons. Zeus appears to them, and in their rush to please him, they feed him what turns out to be a dead child. Zeus feels this is rude. I agree, at the very least, and in punishment turns Lycan and his sons into wolves, where they prowl the countryside hunting human flesh. Now, granted, this is a punishment for Lycan and his sons, but kind of also a punishment to the surrounding countryside, if you really think about it. It's also where we get the creation, eventually, of the term lycanthropy, after Lycan and his sons. So, there you are. Continuing our Greek reference, in the book The Republic, Plato recounted Socrates' story of a tyrant who had turned into a wolf after an act of cannibalism. We see this commonly in these moments. I already mentioned the Native American Wendigo is brought about by cannibalism. These fears of cannibals are a old and deep-rooted fear in the human psyche that probably has quite a bit to do with the origin of the myth of the werewolf. Now, many of these legends, and like the vampire, are clearly influenced by disease. Physically, we have rabies, most likely culprit. Rabies, as we all should know, it creates madness and violent rage, especially in animals and in humans if it goes on long enough. And since there was very little or no cure for rabies at the time, it became an epidemic throughout Europe regularly. And no one's quite sure what happens here. No one understands the path of the disease vectors. If this sounds familiar to the vampire, that's true. We often create myths around ideas and concepts in nature that we don't understand. This is probably one of those cases again, because all that happens is you get bit by an animal, and canines and humanity have a long relationship, including wolves, both friendly and adversarial. So the transmission path of rabies was probably along those lines. We move forward to the 10th century, and we have something new is added to Europe, the Viking, or at least southern Europe. As the Vikings pour into Central Europe and England, these giant, savage, bearded warriors, many of whom wore wolf and bear skins on their way into combat, were deemed demons by much of the clergy, were declared evil and ungodly, and since they were pagans, that's kind of true up to a point. But this rampaging giant furry warrior surely added more to the legend of the werewolf, at least as an organized thing. And it's after the Vikings and the wolf warriors and the more famous berserkers show up that you start to see other legends of the werewolf start to spread throughout northern and central Europe. Legends of witchcraft and paganism follow the path of the Vikings centuries after their conversion, where legends of belts made of wolf fur that, after being soaked in certain herbs and concoctions, notably nightshade and belladonna and other things, when you wore it, it could turn you into a wolf if you had made the appropriate pact with Satan. Those of you who are already on the ball here have probably already figured out some of these herbal concoctions, particularly those made of nightshade, belladonna, other things like that, they are incredibly poisonous. However, if mixed right, they could cause hallucinations and wild behavior. We hear it in modern times all the time. Someone goes berserk, does something horrible. Oh, they were on drugs. They don't blame it on drugs here. They blame it instead on the wolf pelts, pacts with Satan. But nonetheless, there is a level of crossover there in one's cultural manner as we go. But for real werewolf panics, nowhere tops France, of all surprising places. For example, in 1521, Pierre Bourgeot and Michael Verdun were convicted of the murder and cannibalism of several young children and women. And during their trial, the two of them confessed to being in league with demons who had given them concoctions that turned them into wolf-like creatures, and thus they committed their crimes that in those forms under the influence of Satan. Now, you can take this a couple of ways. One, was the confession genuine? Was it forced out of them? We'll never know. I leave that to your own speculation. Or were they trying to gain more attention? Or or even trying to create an excuse or a defense for themselves. You start to see these kind of things scattered throughout France on a regular basis. Insanity and serial killers, which these two probably fall under the heading of, are definitely also markers of the werewolf legend. I mean, even now, how fascinated are we as a culture with serial killers and other evil acts like that? We always look out and read books and seek explanation for why these things happen. In the 1520s, the answer was easy. It was Satan. And the church gladly added into these ideas. Bourgeot and Verdun were sentenced to death and burned because that was seen as one of the sure ways to kill a werewolf. And by coincidence, in France, also seen as one of the sure ways to kill a witch as well, since we have that crossover again. Now, this was also done rather publicly to create a public lesson to stop this. It clearly didn't work. Because like any good panic, over the next several decades, we have at least 6 trials where people are confessed to or convicted of being some form of lycanthrope or werewolf. Once again, these things run in cycles. As in my previous video, we see vampire panics that flow along with disease or moments like this. Then there's my favorite real werewolf story, the Beast of Gévaudan. Between the years of 1764 and 1767, in about a 55 square mile area of south central France, a strange beast was responsible for at least 210 separate attacks, ending in 113 deaths, 49 injuries, and 98 of the victims were partially eaten. The majority of the victims were killed by having their throats ripped out by some large predator. Now, this is insane enough, but as the attacks accelerate, as things build, the church steps in. It describes the beast as a scourge sent by God to punish us for our sins, and issued divine pleas for salvation. But no salvation arrived. Now, the actual description of the beast varied, but in general, it described it as a tawny-colored quadruped about the size of a meme pony, with a tufted tail, and sometimes described with stripes. Sometimes singly. There were also rumors there were more than one beast, maybe even a whole family. The king of France became concerned as things moved forward, as the attacks created mass panic and death throughout the countryside. Troops were sent, and even though they effectively depopulated the entire wolf population of that region, the attacks did not stop. The sightings of the beast actually increased a bit. They could not seem to stop the attacks with a direct method. The king then sent in professional wolf hunters. 2 were used. One who tried to stalk and sneak up on the beast. That did not work. The second tried massive group hunts. Both of their efforts failed for over 4 months. when one of the hunters finally killed a very large gray wolf, somewhere around 31 inches at the shoulder. The issue was then declared resolved. As you can probably guess from my expression here, it wasn't resolved. It calmed down for about a month, and then the attacks resumed again almost immediately. In January of 1767, the attacks built up again. The people of the region despaired, and since there was no more help forthcoming from the government in France, because of course the issue had been resolved to their satisfaction, the deaths continued. It wasn't until June of 1767 where a local hunter named Jean Chastel shot and killed another large beast. This officially marks the end of the sequence with the Beast of Gévaudan, but there's a lot of myth, mystery, and legend wrapped around it. The main ones being that Chastel was the righteous hero who had said his prayers and melted down crucifixes to create a large caliber bullet that finally felled the beast. This all appears to be later additions to the legend. There's no real historical record that says any of that happened. It seemed to have been a normal bullet in a relatively normal hunting incident that finally did the job. Now, the beast was gathered together, what was left of it, and it was shipped to Paris. Now, what happens next is also up for some debate. Some say the beast stank too bad due to bad taxidermy, and there wasn't enough left of it to actually study. It was declared a large wolf and disposed of. Others suggest that it was put on display. The reality is effectively kind of lost in the mists of time to some degree. But what was it? The official declaration, both of them, suggest it was simply a large wolf. Others in history suggest the description more matches and behavior more matches a hyena or some other form of predator. Now, how would a hyena end up in South Central France? There are many potential explanations for that too. Private collections, other ideas. Reality is, we'll never know. But the Beast of Gévaudan always appears in large tellings of the werewolf legend for anyone that's informed on the topic. Films have been made of it, notably a favorite of mine, Brotherhood of the Wolf. It's a French film. You should check it out. It doesn't match the history at all. Not historically accurate. Just being clear on that. But it is entertaining. It has all the elements of the classic werewolf, and since it is open-ended, we analyze it over and over again, because as humans, when we don't have a clear explanation of something, we're often prone to simply make something up that matches our worldview. Right? Is this a horrible thing? It can be. But is it likely to change? No. On that note, I will ask you to stick around for the next in our series of Halloween and October-based history. And tune in for my soon-to-be-up lecture on the U.S. Constitution. And there we go. Once again, thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you in the comments and on the next video.